You don't have to decide between your education and your child. There are so many people out there that are pursuing their education while raising children or while being pregnant, and you can do that too. And there's laws that protect you to make sure it's possible that can happen. It's not an either or dilemma, it's a both and.
We want to empower you to make fully informed choices about your pregnancy and parenting options. Let's talk about what's next now that pregnancy has entered the chat. Welcome back to Pregnancy Has Entered the Chat. Today we have Catherine Riley on the podcast. Catherine is the lead author of Title IX and the Protection of Pregnant and Parenting College Students, is a former part-time assistant professor at Wake Forest University, and is the owner and consultant of Supportive Spaces Consulting, LLC. Catherine, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chloe.
Today we're discussing pregnancy on the college campus. Whether we realize it or not, pregnancy happens on every college campus, and you may be listening today because you are pregnant in college. Today we're going to discuss the resources available to empower you to thrive in your pregnancy and in your collegiate career. Aside from anything mentioned in the introduction, is there anything you want listeners to know about yourself?
Yeah, well, when it comes to being pregnant in college, I can say I have experienced that myself. I was pregnant during my graduate program, and I actually graduated early to deliver my first child. I now have 4 children, one of which is sleeping in the other room, and she's an infant and a baby carrier. And also my mom was pregnant in college with me, and here I am, and she has her career and I have mine, and all of our children are here too.
That is awesome. Yeah, you've got the firsthand experience of what it's like to be a student who's pregnant. And had you delivered your baby by the time you graduated, or? I graduated
a semester early, okay. And my professors worked with me to get my writing done sooner so that awesome. I could, but it was under my graduate robe. I had a big baby.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So sometimes our stories, really inform our passions in the future. So that's really cool to know that was something your mom experienced and something that you experienced. So we know that pregnancy happens on the college campus, and as you mentioned in your book, colleges don't record this data from their students. What would you say to someone who's listening and just found out they're pregnant in college?
I think the most important thing to remind yourself right away is that you're not alone. Even if you've never noticed anyone else that's pregnant, there's tons. In fact, 1 in 5 students in the United States, college students, is pregnant or parenting. Parenting. 1 in 5 students in the United States is a parenting college student. So that's important to keep in mind, even if it feels scary. The second thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to decide between your education and your child. There are so many people out there that are pursuing their education while raising children or while being pregnant, and you can do that too. And there's laws that protect you to make sure it's possible that can happen. It's not an either or dilemma, it's a both and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is super important to know that there are those resources that women can access and men can access too if they're parenting in college. Mm-hmm. Something that we at the Pregnancy Network remind women too is that they are not alone, because it can feel like a really lonely space experiencing an unplanned pregnancy. In your experience, how common is pregnancy among college students?
So in my teaching experience, I have encountered a lot of different students that are pregnant or thought they were pregnant or had a child at home living with parents, different scenarios. One time I actually polled one of my classes and asked, how many of you in this class know of someone who has gotten pregnant while at school, like right now? And half of my students knew of someone, and a handful of my students knew of more than one. So that's just an idea, even though schools are not pooling this data yet. But once you start digging, you'll find some information. Statistically, there's not a ton of national information, but what we do know from available data is that 20% of college students are parenting college students, which is a big population. That includes junior colleges and everything, but that's a significant number. And then within that, if you're thinking, so grad students, there's lots that are parenting in there because it's a little bit older population. But if you're even looking at younger students, in the rate of like 18 to 24 years of age, there's more than 1 unintended pregnancy for every 10 women. So that's a huge number of even unplanned pregnancies. And all of this is college age and is real. So for anyone that's experiencing a pregnancy right now, you're certainly not alone. There's so many people in this age.
Yeah, that is super helpful to know, even just the data to back up that your experience is not unique. It's unique to you, but it's not out of the ordinary. So what resources does Title IX afford students, and what is Title IX?
Yeah. So Title IX is a anti-discrimination law that was established by the Department of Education, and they basically it's to prevent sex discrimination. So a lot of people know about it to prevent like sports, to make sure you have women's sports, not just men's, and also to prevent sexual violence, things like this. But sometimes people don't realize that it also relates to protecting pregnant and parenting students, and that includes miscarriage and all things that fall into the categories relating to pregnancy and parenting. The U.S. Department of Education has this really cool flyer you can print if you type up U.S. Department of Education and then pregnant and parenting rights. They have a flyer that's front to back, really clearly lays out, here's the list of rights. And these include things like continued participation. If you want to participate in your clubs, you want to participate in class, things like this, you're allowed to. So participation, excused absences for medically necessary absences, and also like doctor's appointments, things like that, you are granted those. You can also, this is really important, return to your academic life after delivery or your medical leave, short term. You can return the same status. This is really important that students understand. Things like if you can or cannot be in your sorority, if you can and not be in other clubs or sports or certain classes or scholarship. Title IX says you have the same status that you're supposed to hold in the guidance materials of Title IX. Also accommodations, as stomachs grow bigger or as it's harder to walk upstairs, you are entitled to accommodations. Also protection against harassment from your peers or anybody else on campus. And Title IX also says that the school should provide you with a knowledgeable faculty and staff about your rights so that they can help you. And the faculty and staff are supposed to be trained in this. There's some shortfall as to how aware faculty and staff are. We can talk about that later, but they're supposed to be. And so if they're not, you can just remind them like, hey, this is what Title IX says.
Yeah.
Fathers, this entails them too. And the Department of Education guidance documents make it clear that this includes fathers because births and pregnancies affect them as well. And then lastly, Title IX affords students a legal course of action. So if some of their rights are not being held, if there's a problem, it says this is the manner in which you can file your grievances, and it provides a pathway so that the law can be upheld.
Yeah, that is wonderful to hear that there are those systems in place, and if they're not being upheld, that there is a protection for that. What are some of those things that Title IX does afford students on a really practical level?
So there's some interpretation gray areas of how schools are applying Title IX or upholding it. So I wouldn't necessarily say it says schools must provide these things. They just say it must provide support, and then schools interpret that. So some of the ways that schools are starting to interpret that are by providing resources through places like Women's Center or diversity centers. But then it's also cool that schools are starting to have lactation rooms, which they should, because they're also employment spaces for many women that are having children. But also the students need those. So lactation rooms is available. I know on our campus, I've been pushing, or at Wake, I was pushing for more diaper changing stations, things like this. Our Women's Center now has like a little carol of activity things for children to do, so that if you have your child on campus one day, you can come by and grab a coloring book. Or if you just need a place to study in between classes, you can go there and there's something for your child to do while you're there. So it's a little bit different on every campus, but just making a space that's hospitable to children, I think, is a trend that many people are pushing for. And some campuses are more progressive and some are, still catching up. But yeah, there's a couple of hospitality things that are important in there.
Yeah, that is really wonderful to hear, just that there is a little bit of freedom in how schools go about creating a supportive space. But you mentioned before too with Title IX that a lot of people think of sports, or a lot of people think of sexual assault and protections for that realm of campus life. But I was just in school a few years ago and I never heard about protection for pregnancy or parenting college students. So I think the work that you're doing is really important.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that you didn't hear about that, because actually of all the students we interviewed for my book, only one knew that Title IX related to their pregnancy and parenting scenario. And that was a shame, because there's so many rights that these students could have made sure that were upheld that they didn't know until we told them. But now you know.
Yes, I'm so thankful that that we've gotten to connect and I've gotten to read parts of your book. So who should a student go to for support on a college campus?
Because you as a student are interacting with them so often, it's really important to be transparent with your professors. You can judge which professors you want to go to, but if anything comes up, if you have to take medical leave, or if you have a child at home who gets pneumonia, like I had a student that happened to them, it's helpful to be transparent with your professors so that they know like what's going on behind the scenes. And then they can help you. You don't have to give a lot of details, but just be transparent and then they can help. Also, that if your school has a diversity office or a women's center office, you can go and see what sort of resources might be there. Usually they have a huge list of local resources and you can pick and choose which ones you use, but it's a good place to gather information. And also find someone that will be your support person to make sure others on campus are being supportive as well. If you're having some pushback somewhere, the diversity office, the women's center office, they should be your champion. So they're a good ally to have. The counseling center or your campus chaplain's office, depending on what kind of mental health support you're looking for, or spiritual support, are really good, because I think in my experiences and also a lot of the experiences I've seen with students, it's not so much a matter of like, can I do the coursework and have a child? In fact, most pregnant and parenting college students, the statistics are their GPAs are higher than their peers because they're so determined to work. So it's not so much a question of like, can you do it? It's a question of dealing with the emotional burden of having all this extra stuff on your plate. And so that's where the counseling center and the campus chaplain's office is often really helpful for students. So I would highly recommend you go there just to have some emotional and spiritual support.
Yeah.
And then lastly, if you run into problems, if there is any pushback from faculty or from peers or from things, you can go to the Title IX office, and that is where you can file a complaint formally about something that has occurred. That's a very long legal process, and I wouldn't say it's like the fastest solution. Sometimes just like confronting the problem is the fastest solution, but that's what the Title IX office is there for. So I would recommend like directly approaching scenarios, and then if you need backup, that's a place to go.
Yeah, that's awesome to think about those practical resources, but then also the emotional resources and spiritual resources that women can take advantage of, women and men on the college campus. Because like you said, it's both building up that community of resources, but also your emotional support and your spiritual support, because there's two sides of it. It's knowing that you can do it from a practical standpoint, but then also knowing that you'll be supported and knowing that there will be people in your corner.
Right, exactly.
Where else can students turn for support in their college towns?
Yeah, I love this question because support is so important to students. It's like I said before, it's not a matter of like if it's possible to do the education. It's more, where am I going to get the support from? Because it is possible. Places in town that you can generally find support are good to find sooner rather than later. I strongly encourage people to start with pregnancy resource centers like the Pregnancy Network, but every town has different ones. The town I live in has about 5 in the vicinity, so they're there, but students don't know about them because you don't really need them until you're pregnant.
Yeah.
But if you find these, they're really great because they can help you with ultrasounds or pregnancy tests and insurance, things like this. But they can connect you with all the other resources in town. So like food banks, diaper banks, Medicaid, OBGYN recommendations, which students might not have their own physician here because this might not be their hometown where they're going to college. So how are you going to find these things if you never needed one before? And as one of my students said, I wasn't a parent and local parents weren't my friends. So I had no idea how to connect with these things. Maternity and infant clothing, Title IX information. There's so much support out there that's hard to find on your own. But if you start with a pregnancy resource center, they can connect you with all the other things. So that's great. The other thing I would recommend students find right away is an actual OBGYN clinic that has full prenatal care services. Pregnancy centers are great. And I know a lot of people, like the first thing they might think of would be Planned Parenthood, but a lot of clinics, including pregnancy resource centers, they can't offer a full range of support to get you through all 9 months, or even just like all of your options. For example, I interviewed one of the managers from a Planned Parenthood, and she said that they only provided pregnancy tests. Mm-hmm. That was even less than the pregnancy centers in our area. So this is something that students aren't aware of. you want to go somewhere that's going to give you the maximum amount of resources at your fingertips and connect you. So OBGYN clinics are a good start also because they provide full care. And as I said before, in college towns, there's generally tons of different groups, like buy nothing Facebook groups that you didn't need until you were a mom, and now you need like diapers and extra toys that you don't want to buy at the store, but someone outgrew them, extra clothes, things like this. So Facebook buy nothing groups, diaper banks, infant maternity closets, which children's clothes, if you didn't know, they are so great to get secondhand because children outgrow them in like a month and a half. So they're still perfect condition. Yeah. So no shame in getting hand-me-downs. I'm all about it. So all of those little places, there's a million places to support students in every single college town. It's just a matter of getting connected and knowing where they are, and then you're set.
Yeah, I love that you started with pregnancy resource centers because I'm very passionate about it, but it really can be a one-stop shop to get those referrals. I know that we do this, and I know other pregnancy resource centers, everyone does it a little different, but we have OBGYN referrals, and we also have OBGYNs that accept Medicare. So if you don't have insurance in college, we can get you connected to a provider that will accept Medicaid and accept these different programs.
Right. And they'll get you the paperwork set up so that you can have the government insurance.
Yes.
You're not, because you don't have to, some schools, for example, don't have student insurance for students with dependents. But then also, like, if you're on your parents' insurance, you can't stay on there with grandchildren. That doesn't work. But pregnancy centers can connect you with the paperwork to get the government insurance. And 20-year-olds are not thinking about that, but there's someone ready to help.
Yes. And then all those other resources that you mentioned are also awesome. And buy nothing groups and Facebook Marketplace, all these things that you can get some essentials. And your local pregnancy resource center may have some maternity clothes and infant clothes and those sorts of things as well. So your book is wonderful. I really enjoyed reading through some of that research that you did. It really was, it's helpful to have the whole picture of, a lot of the population that we serve here. What inspired you to write Title IX and the protection of pregnant and parenting college students?
Yeah, so I think it was a very slow, long time coming project. I was in college for my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD. And all during that time, even when I was a prospective student and I was still in high school, I kept noticing pregnant college students. And at first I thought like, oh, must be normal. I didn't really know that, people thought that was abnormal, even though it's actually normal. I just noticed it. I guess I had an eye for it. I don't know. So I had people I knew that got pregnant in undergrad. I had met some as a prospective student when I went to graduate school. Some of my classmates were pregnant. I became pregnant. I mean, I was married at the time, but I saw all different scenarios of people in pregnancies in college. So it was always something I thought about. And then I had a student that asked me to do some research together, a student faculty project. So I gave her a couple options that were totally different. And this was the one she chose. So I said, okay, let's do it. So we started looking at the communication that schools were producing, like, what are your rights or what do they do? And we also started interviewing students just for background information. But the more we heard from students, the more we realized that their stories needed to be told. So then we decided to write a little something. And then the more we researched, we were like, we need to write a lot of something. Yeah. So we applied for a book contract, and I didn't want to write the book because I was pregnant at the time and thought this sounds like a lot of work. And we got the book contract. So then I was like, okay, I guess I need a grant. So I'll write the book if I get a grant. We got a bioethics grant because it is a bioethics concern.
Yeah.
There's ethical scenarios of like students should be supported. This is a real thing, and pregnancy is a real biological thing. So we got a bioethics grant, and we wrote the book. And just like being pregnant in college, you can do it. I can also write a book while pregnant. I've done it twice now. So that's how the book came to be. And it's really thanks to Lexi Hutchinson, my co-author and former student who wanted to do this project. And now she works for the Department of Justice and has a law degree.
That is wonderful. Yeah. Just seeing how that passion kind of started in you, and then she came alongside you and decided that was something she wanted to pursue as well.
Yeah. And I think it was a matter too of like being open to need we were seeing in front of us and saying, well, what are we going to do about this? And we ran with it.
Yeah. That is really wonderful. So you mentioned in your book that the conversations college students have around sex and fertility can be unproductive due to mutual misinformation. What do you think is helpful for women listening to know about their bodies and their fertility?
I think, first of all, it's important to know that the internet is not the best source of information because there's so many variations of the truth that you're going to get on there. So you have to be really careful when you read anything on the internet. The second thing is that students a lot of times get information from their friends and the internet. But if your friends get information from the internet, then it's like this cycle of misinformation. So you have to be careful. In the book, I tried to present a full spectrum that's pulling from medical databases, pulling from journal articles, really great scientific information that essentially is the knowledge that a lot of college students don't have because they never got it in high school or from their parents or wherever. So some really basic things that I think are important to know are that the female body has a natural fertility cycle. So it's not like you can get pregnant any day, anytime. Just like any animal species, like there's a phase of non-fertile and then fertile days. For women with regular cycles that occur about every 28 days, it's common that day 13 is when you are most likely to ovulate or release an egg. So that's approximately when it's most likely to get pregnant, but there's some windows within that range. Another interesting and important thing to realize is that there's a lot of biological signs the human body puts out that indicate this is a fertile time. So students and anybody could learn to track what those fertile symptoms are and then know when your body is fertile and infertile. It's not a mystery. It's pretty evident. And in fact, that's what people do later when they are seeking to get pregnant. They learn a lot of those signs, and then that's when they decide to have intercourse in order to achieve pregnancy. Mm-hmm. You can do the opposite to not get pregnant.
Yes.
So those are some basic important fertility details. And I go into a lot of detail in that in the book, just explaining that biological reality.
We talk about a lot here that knowledge is power. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to our bodies and our fertility. Knowing the most reliable information that's out there can really help women to make these choices, before or after an unplanned or planned pregnancy. It's really helpful to know just how our bodies work and getting our information from reputable sources and not necessarily our peers or the internet, though those things can hold out helpful information, but not always.
Yeah. And it's really never too early or too late to learn about that. So even if you're already pregnant, this can help you for your future deciding when you want to have another child or when you want to wait or what. It's never too early or too late to learn how your body's working. And even like younger kids, even if you're, an adolescent or it's middle school, it's really great to understand how your body works because then you can appreciate it and you can value it for how it was designed.
Yes.
Yeah. When I was working on that chapter, I actually had some of my students read through it. I give them the chance to edit me.
That's awesome.
And they thought it was really cool to see all these different facts that they didn't know. I included some information because knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. So some of the things they really liked or were interested to know is that college students are near the most fertile time of your life. So between 22 and 26 is peak fertility, and it starts decreasing very rapidly after the age of 30. By the age of 40, a woman only has 3% of her ovarian reserve left. So you can't get pregnant every time, but if you are going to get pregnant, between 22 and 26 is like prime time. So you can sort of use that information how you would like. Another important thing to think about is some studies have found, and all of these sources are cited in my book, studies have found that women tend to flirt more during their fertile period of the month, the fertile window. They flirt more, they seek out male companionship more, and one study even found that women tend to wear more revealing clothing during that time of the month, which is not something they're like planning on doing. These are just all things that happen to occur without them realizing there's some biological drive that's slightly changing their behavior. So with that in mind, you can really, as a college student or, an adult like me, shape and change your behavior to be mindful of what to protect yourself if you don't want to have a baby right away, or if you do. Another interesting thing that some males found in my class found interesting was that male partners actually tend to be more attracted to their female partners when those females are during their fertile phase.
Wow.
Again, they don't know that. It's
Yes.
just when they're ranking attraction, it tends to be highest during that part of the women's cycle, which is really interesting.
That is super interesting. And there was one other stat that I was reading in there that I was like, wow, I work at a pregnancy resource center. I feel like I kind of know some of these things, but you had mentioned in your book, you'll have to let me know exactly what it was, but women are more likely to ovulate when they sleep next to a male partner at a certain time of or a certain number of times per month.
Yeah, it was the more frequently they slept with a male partner, they were actually more likely to ovulate. Like it would increase the frequency of their ovulation, which I was like, interesting.
That is, it was so fascinating.
But your body is really responding to its physical surroundings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just thought so much of that was so interesting and so helpful for women to know. I'm sure your students editing that were not only appreciative of opportunity to just review something, but also got to learn a whole lot.
It learned a whole lot, and also I think, again, knowledge is really empowering. It doesn't surprise me that several of the students we interviewed said, well, this was the first time I had ever had sex and we got pregnant. And that was more than one student told me that. Yeah. And it's not really that surprising when you think about how biology works. Like when your body is created to procreate, if you put yourself in a situation where procreation is possible and you are fertile, it's more likely because our bodies are primed to be fertile and reproduce.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is a holistic thing. So it doesn't surprise me that they would have had sex the first time and it would have been during a fertile phase because they were responding to some natural tendencies that had they realized, they could have changed their behavior. But they both, now they have their children and they're both married. So life moves on and they found the support they needed to make it work, even though they were extremely shocked at first.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm sure, pregnancy is a huge thing. And anytime that you're not expecting it and you experience it, it's shocking. It takes a little bit of time to...
Yeah, even for married people, you're like, what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So you talk about this with your supportive spaces consulting company, but how can colleges create supportive spaces for women and men experiencing pregnancies? And what can other students do to advocate for themselves and one another?
So I think the single most important thing colleges can do is to remove coercion from the picture. Students really need to understand, and faculty and staff really need to understand, that students have the right to be pregnant and be parenting in college. It's the same in the workplace. Faculty and staff have the right to have a job and have a child. It's not an either or decision. And it's the same for students. So by removing coercion, we can make it a much more supportive place. A student really should be able to choose what they're doing with their education, regardless of whether they're having a child or not. They can do it. So that's really important. One thing that colleges can do when they remove coercion is to make sure that peers understand what it means to be supportive. It really broke my heart to hear students say that their friends had told them, like, oh, well, if it was me, I'd get an abortion. Because they said that wasn't what I expected my best friend to say to me. But on the flip side, it really warmed my heart to hear students say, like, this other guy in my class left a note of encouragement on my desk. Like, I didn't even really know him. He just knew I was going through this new trial. Or someone else brought her flowers, or in one case, for example, someone else brought her flowers. So it's great to hear stories where peers are being really encouraging, but it's also sad to hear where they're making assumptions and asserting what they think would be best rather than just embracing your friend and being supportive of their new situation. So my advice is to seek out the friends that are encouraging, but also to be that friend for your friends as well. And you never know who you're going to get support from. Maybe who was your best friend isn't really anymore. And maybe people are going to step up and be your new best friend. And that's great. Friends are there for different seasons, and that's what we need. One more story I will share is I love this story. There was this couple that became pregnant, and she was in a sorority, he was in a fraternity. You would have thought, just stereotyping, that the females would have been the more nurturing and supportive, but actually they were not that kind initially. But the fraternity brothers like stepped up and they were like, we'll babysit, we'll throw a baby shower. Like who would have thought? Like the stereotypes were totally reversed, but it really made a difference having that support and helping that couple. So it's neat to see. So don't write off, if your friends leave you, don't write it off, but also you will find support and people are really great.
Yeah, I heard a story recently. I have, sorority sisters that are still in college, and they know that I work at the Pregnancy Network, and I got a text and it was like, hey, I have a classmate. I don't really know her that well, but she's pregnant, and I want to know how to be a support system, like how to, as someone that doesn't. So even if you don't know exactly what to do or what to say, you maybe reach out to like a family member that's been pregnant or your mom or whoever it is, and just say, hey, is there anything helpful that I could do? Like, would something have been helpful for you? Because there's ways that everyone can help and just create a supportive environment, regardless of, we don't always know what to say, and that's okay.
And sometimes just having friends that'll like, well, I'll call around and find a diaper bank, or I'll call around and find like which OB is the good OB in town. I mean, someone just to do that legwork for you while you're doing other legwork.
Yeah.
It's really kind and helpful to be that kind of friend. So look for those, but also be those whenever you can. The other thing, besides like removing coercion and helping peers be good supportive friends, the other thing I would say is, feel free to ask advice for people around you, including faculty and staff. When I was getting my PhD and I was living in a new state, in a new town, it was a college town of 60,000 undergrads.
Wow.
I had no idea what OB I should go to. And one of my professors was like, you're going to that OB? Go to this one. This one is much better. So seek out advice. And I did. And that was much better. I'm glad I did.
That's awesome.
But your faculty and staff on your campus are parents too. They can get you connected really fast. So find some that look nice and then say, hey, where can I go find? And they'll be glad to help you.
That's awesome. So another piece of this is the schools themselves creating supportive spaces for faculty and students to be parents or pregnant in school. So could you just touch on that a little bit of what can universities do and what role they have?
Yeah. So I will say that there's a big range. Like some universities are really advanced in the support they provide, and some of them are, as one person said, so behind they think they're ahead. But one thing they can do is providing hospitality, as I said. So that means, having a picture book or two in the lobby, having allowing children to be present, like when you're studying in the library, or so just making it reasonable and not giving people weird looks. But also they can do things like provide childcare centers. The faculty and staff need that, and tons of universities have it, but then others don't. I'm happy to say the university I was working at, after 30 years of trying to get a childcare center, just announced last month that they are finally having one. So that was like really huge.
Yes.
But progress is good. Even sometimes it takes a lot of patience, but every little milestone that occurs, I think, is important. And students can know that they can be part of making that progress. When they announced the childcare situation at our university, that it was finally coming to fruition, I actually texted some of the former students that I'm still good friends with, and told them, because this was something they wanted so badly and wished it was there. And so they were so happy for the next generation of students and faculty and staff to have the chance to bring their child to a safe place that was nearby and conveniently located and accessible to students. So it's great. Colleges should be providing lactation centers. Colleges should be providing childcare centers, or at least ones that are affiliated with the university for faculty and staff. They should be providing diaper changing tables so that students, faculty, and staff don't have to change diapers on the bathroom floor. They should be accommodating in office hours. For example, students who have to go pick up their child from childcare, they might not be able to get to an office hour that's, at 3:00 in the afternoon. So being mindful of that and being flexible for the realities of students, just as faculty and staff would want others to be, school gets out at 3:00, I got to get there. Well, students with children are the same. So being accommodating and mindful and not quite so rigid. I actually have an entire book that my second book is coming out next month, and it is specifically on how to create supportive spaces for students. So that's a whole nother book topic.
Yes.
But there's some things students and faculty and staff should expect of their colleges and hold them accountable to provide it.
That's wonderful. And congratulations on your second book coming out. That'll be such a helpful resource for universities to have a framework to go from. So this is a question I like to ask all of our guests, just to discuss kind of what brought you to where you are and your why for serving people in the capacity that you do. So you can talk about how your why has evolved a little bit, being in different roles, but what your why is for serving women and families in the capacity that you do.
I think the pregnant and parenting students I serve through my writing and the advocacy work I've been doing, those are the people that motivate me. It wasn't the statistics. It wasn't the publication I needed on my CV. It was because when I met with these students, when I saw their stories, when I heard their stories, when I saw their children, that motivated me to keep going. And, I interview them and I'm crying and they're crying, or I'm happy and they're happy. Or sometimes they email me milestones like, guess what happened? I got this. And I'm so happy for them. And I want them to experience the joys that other parents get to experience. And I want them to have careers like other people have careers. So they're really the ones that keep me motivated, even when it's hard. Like some of this work I did because not everybody is so supportive. Like I had panic attacks. I had a lot of anxiety about doing this hard advocacy work when most people are supportive, but some people are not. But it was always the students that kept me motivated because I cared about them.
Yeah. That's really wonderful. And, those students are graduated and married and all those things, but there's always going to be new generations of students and families that need this type of support. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And the work of educating as well is super important. And I've benefited a lot from it. So thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to share.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. And yeah, it was great to have you on.
You're welcome. Thanks, Chloe.